For thousands of years, the most powerful empires on Earth made the same catastrophic mistake. They looked at Iran and saw a land that could be conquered. They were right. Iran was conquered. Again and again and again. By the Macedonians. By the Arabs. By the Mongols. By the British. Every single one of them marched in with absolute certainty that this time, Iranian civilization would finally be erased from the face of the earth. Every single one of them was wrong. Because here's what none of these conquerors understood before it was too late. There are two kinds of civilizations in this world. Civilizations that survive by winning, and civilizations that survive by making their enemies forget who they are. Iran belongs to the second category. And in 5,000 years of recorded history, it has never once failed to do exactly that. Alexander the Great conquered Iran, and within a decade was wearing Persian robes and marrying Persian princesses. The Arab Caliphate conquered Iran, and within 2 centuries was running its government. With Persian bureaucrats and writing its greatest literature in the Persian language, the Mongols, the most terrifying military force in human history, conquered Iran, and within 3 generations had converted to Islam, built Persian mosques, and were commissioning Persian poetry. This is not coincidence. This is not luck. This is a strategy. The most sophisticated cultural survival strategy ever developed by any civilization in human history. But before we explain how Iran did this, we need to ask a question that almost no one asks. Why did every empire in history feel compelled to try to destroy Iran in the first place? What was it about this plateau, these mountains, these people, that made the greatest conquerors in history feel that Iran was a threat that simply could not be allowed to exist? The answer to that question reaches back 5,000 years. And once you understand it, you will never see the modern world the same way again. To understand how Iran survived every empire in history, you first have to understand what Iran actually is. Not politically, geographically. Because before Iran was a civilization, it was a landscape. And that landscape shaped everything that came after it in ways that no conqueror ever fully appreciated until it was too late. The Iranian plateau sits at the absolute center of the ancient world. To the west lies Mesopotamia, the birthplace of writing and law and organized civilization. To the east lies the Indian subcontinent, one of the most densely populated and richest regions on Earth. To the north stretch the endless steppes of Central Asia, from which nomadic warriors emerged in waves for thousands of years. To the south lies the Persian Gulf, the gateway to maritime trade with Arabia and Africa. Iran sits in the middle of all of this. Every trade route of the ancient world passed through or near Iranian territory. Silk from China traveled through Iran to reach Rome. Spices from India moved through Iranian markets. Ideas, religions, technologies, and armies all flowed across this plateau. Whoever controlled Iran controlled the nervous system of the entire ancient world. And this is precisely why every empire felt it had to control Iran. Not because Iran was weak, but because Iran was indispensable. But here's the thing about indispensable places. They are very difficult to actually hold. The Iranian plateau is ringed by some of the most formidable mountain ranges on Earth. The Zagros Mountains rise in the west like a wall separating Iran from Mesopotamia. The Alborz Mountains run along the north between the plateau and the Caspian Sea. Inside these natural walls lies a landscape of extreme and brutal contrasts. Lush green valleys sit next to vast salt deserts where nothing survives. Any army marching into Iran had to first survive the mountains, then survive the desert, and then deal with a population that had been living and fighting in this landscape for 50 centuries. This geography did something profound to the Iranian people. It taught them patience. It taught them that no enemy could stay forever, because the land itself would eventually break them. The mountains were always there. The desert was always there. No matter how many soldiers an invader brought, the land was on the side of the Iranians. And this geographical certainty gave Iranian civilization a baseline confidence that no military defeat could permanently destroy. They had survived the land. It could survive anything. But geography alone does not explain Iranian survival. Many civilizations have had defensible geography and still disappeared. The real secret weapon of Iran was not physical at all. It was intellectual. It was ideological. It was in the most precise sense of the word, spiritual. Somewhere in the second millennium before Christ, on the harsh Iranian plateau, a man named Zarathustra sat in the mountains and arrived at a conclusion that would change the mental framework of the entire human race. He declared that the universe was not random, was not governed by dozens of petty gods fighting among themselves. The universe was the battleground of a single cosmic war. On one side, Ahura Mazda, the god of light, truth, wisdom, and order. On the other side, Angra Mainyu, the force of evil, deception, chaos, and destruction. This sounds simple, but think about what it actually means for a civilization to organize itself around this idea. You cannot destroy a people whose deepest identity is tied not to a particular king or a particular capital city, but to a cosmic moral principle. You can burn the capital, you can kill the king, but you cannot kill the idea that truth and goodness are real forces in the universe worth fighting for, and that Iran stands on the side of truth and goodness. That idea lived in the language, in the poetry, in the prayers, in the architecture, in the names people gave their children. It was completely indestructible, precisely because it was not located anywhere that could be conquered. But Zoroastrianism did something even more revolutionary to human thought, something so fundamental that we still live inside it today, without realizing where it came from. It introduced the concept of linear time. Before Zarathustra, virtually every ancient civilization understood time as cyclical. Seasons came and went. Empires rose and fell. Kings died and new kings were born. Everything repeated in an endless circle with no beginning, no end, and no destination. Zarathustra declared this was wrong. Time had a beginning. Time was moving toward an inevitable conclusion. There would be a final battle between light and darkness, a purification of the world, a last judgment. When Cyrus the Great conquered Babylon in 539 before Christ and freed the Jewish people from captivity, the Jews spent 2 centuries as subjects of the Persian Empire. During this period of intense contact, Jewish thinkers absorbed the Zoroastrian concept of linear time, an end of days, of a final judgment, of a coming figure who would purify the world. These ideas flowed from Iran into Judaism, then into Christianity, then into Islam. Every time any human being on earth today thinks about the end of the world, thinks about history as a story moving toward a conclusion, thinks about a final reckoning in which good will triumph over evil, they are thinking in categories first developed on the Iranian plateau 3,000 years ago. The Iranian plateau did not just produce a civilization, it produced the mental framework within which billions of people across the entire world still understand time, history, and human destiny. In 550 before Christ, a man emerged from the Persian highlands who would become one of the most consequential rulers in the history of the world. Cyrus history would call him Cyrus the Great, and what he built was unlike anything the world had seen before. Cyrus united the 2 great Iranian peoples, the Persians and the Medes. Then he conquered Lydia in western Turkey. Then he swept through Central Asia, and then he did something that shocked the entire ancient world. He marched on Babylon, the greatest city on earth, and it fell without a fight. And what he did next was even more shocking than the conquest itself. He did not loot Babylon. He did not enslave its people. He did not destroy its temples. He walked into the great temple of Marduk, made offerings to the Babylonian god, and declared himself the liberator of the Babylonian people. He freed the Jewish people who had been held in captivity and allowed them to return to their homeland and rebuild their temple. He issued decrees in the languages of every people he conquered, presenting himself not as a foreign conqueror, but as a legitimate king who respected local traditions and local gods. This was not idealism, this was genius. Cyrus understood something that no ruler before him had fully grasped. The most efficient way to govern a vast multi-ethnic empire is not to crush the identities of conquered peoples, but to incorporate them into a larger system that respects their distinctiveness. The Achaemenid Empire that Cyrus founded became the first empire in history built consciously on the principle of managed diversity. His successor, Darius I, expanded this empire to its greatest extent. Under Darius, Persian rule stretched from Egypt in the west to the Indus Valley in the east. Nearly 50 million people, Roughly half the entire population of the earth at that time lived under Persian governance. Darius divided the empire into 20 administrative districts called satrapies. He built the royal road, nearly 3,000 kilometers long, along which royal messengers could carry information from one end of the empire to the other in 7 days. He introduced unified coinage, a standardized legal system, and a postal service that would not be equaled in speed for another 2,000 years. This was the first superpower in history, and it was Iranian. And then came Greece. And here is where you need to hear a story you have almost certainly never been told correctly. The story most people know goes like this. 300 brave Spartans held the pass at Thermopylae against a Persian army of millions. The Greeks heroically defeated the Persian tyrant and saved Western civilization. Persia was humiliated and never recovered. This story is a myth, not entirely false, but so incomplete that it amounts to a distortion of what actually happened. Yes, the Persians invaded Greece twice and failed to conquer the Greek mainland. This is true. But here's what the Greek sources quietly leave out. For the Achaemenid Empire, Greece was a minor frontier province on the outer edge of a vast domain that stretched from Egypt to India. The total population of all the Greek city-states combined was smaller than a single average Persian province. The resources of Greece were trivial compared to the wealth of Egypt or Mesopotamia. The invasion of Greece was not an existential Persian campaign. It was a punitive expedition to punish the Athenians for their support of a revolt in Persian-controlled Greek cities. When the expeditions failed, the Persian Empire absorbed the setback and moved forward. Meanwhile, the Greek city-states, supposedly victorious, tore themselves apart in the catastrophic Peloponnesian War between Athens and Sparta. And while they were destroying each other, the Persians executed a strategy of breathtaking sophistication. They began funding both sides. Persian gold subsidized the Spartan navy that defeated Athens. Persian gold then switched to supporting Athens against Sparta. The Persians played the Greeks against each other with patient brilliance until there was almost nothing left to fight over. In 387 before Christ, the exhausted Greeks signed the King's Peace. Under this treaty, the Greek cities of Asia Minor were formally recognized as Persian territory. The Greek city-states agreed not to form alliances without Persian approval. The king of Persia was recognized as the supreme arbiter of Greek political affairs. The civilization that supposedly lost the Persian wars was now the undisputed master of the Greek world, having spent not a single additional drop of Persian blood to achieve it. This was Iranian strategy, patient, indirect, playing the longest game in the room. And then came Alexander. In 334 before Christ, a 22-year-old Macedonian king crossed into Asia and within 7 years had conquered the entire Persian Empire. In 330 before Christ, he burned Persepolis to the ground. The world held its breath. 500 years of Iranian imperial civilization seemed to be finished. What happened next was one of the most extraordinary cultural reversals in recorded history. Alexander began wearing Persian robes. He adopted Persian court ceremonial and married a Persian princess, incorporated Persian soldiers and Persian administrators into his government. He was not simply ruling Persia. He was becoming Persian. The young Macedonian king who had come to destroy Iranian civilization was being quietly absorbed by it. His officers were horrified. His Macedonian soldiers mutinied in protest. But Alexander could not stop. The Persian cultural gravity was stronger than his own identity. His successors, the Seleucids, tried harder to impose Greek culture. They built Greek cities across the Iranian plateau. They promoted the Greek language and Greek customs. But the Iranian plateau was not Greece. The indigenous culture was too old, too deep, too sophisticated to be overwritten. The vast majority of the population continued to speak Persian, to practice Zoroastrianism, to organize their social lives according to Iranian patterns. The Greek rulers were visitors. Iranian culture was the furniture of the world. You could change the visitors, but the furniture remained. By the mid-3rd century before Christ, the Iranian cultural immune system had produced its response. The Parthians, an Iranian people from the eastern steppes, expelled the Seleucids and established the Parthian Empire. Their king declared himself King of Kings, the Achaemenid title, and presented himself as the rightful heir of Cyrus and Darius. The Iranian imperial tradition had reasserted itself. had taken barely a century. The Parthians spent the next 5 centuries as the great rival of Rome. At the Battle of Carrhae in 53 before Christ, Parthian cavalry destroyed a Roman army of 40,000 soldiers and killed one of the most powerful men in Rome. The Parthian Empire eventually gave way to the Sasanian Empire in 224 of the Common Era, which fought Rome and then Byzantium for another 4 centuries as the legitimate heir of ancient Iranian civilization. Iran had gone from apparent annihilation to renewed superpower status in less than 3 generations. The survival mechanism had worked perfectly. By the early 7th century, the Sasanian Empire was exhausted. Centuries of warfare against Byzantium had bled it almost dry, and from the deserts of Arabia came a force that no one in the established world had anticipated. Arab armies, united under the banner of Islam, exploded outward with a speed that stunned the ancient world. In 636, the Sasanian army was destroyed at the Battle of Qadisiyah. By 651, the last Iranian king was dead. Iran was under Arab rule. This was the greatest threat to Iranian identity in its entire history. The Arabs brought not just a new political system, but a new religion, a new language, a new social order, and an explicit ideology that everything before Islam was darkness and ignorance. Zoroastrianism, the ancient Iranian faith that had shaped this civilization for over a millennium, was systematically marginalized. Arabic became the language of power, religion, and culture. Iranian converts to Islam were expected to adopt Arab names and Arab customs and accept a subordinate position in an Arab-dominated hierarchy. For any other culture, this would have been the end. Look at Egypt. Look at Syria. Look at North Africa. All of these ancient civilizations were completely Arabized. Their ancient languages disappeared. Their ancient religions disappeared. Their ancient identities were absorbed and erased. The same fate seemed inevitable for Iran, but the Iranians struck back, not with swords, with words. Persian did not disappear. It bent, absorbed thousands of Arabic words, adopted the Arabic script, and survived as a living spoken and literary language. Then, starting in the 9th century, it began its remarkable comeback. A new literary tradition emerged in Persian that produced poetry and prose of such extraordinary quality that even Arab rulers were forced to acknowledge it. The poet Ferdowsi spent 30 years writing the Shahnameh, 60,000 verses of Persian poetry retelling the entire pre-Islamic history of Iran. It was cultural defiance on an epic scale. He was saying to the Arab world, our history was real, our heroes were real, our civilization was real, and we will remember it in a language you cannot take from us. The Abbasid Caliphate, which came to power in 750, found itself so dependent on Iranian administrators, scholars, and cultural frameworks that it was essentially running a Persian government with an Arabic religious exterior. Persian bureaucrats managed the state. Persian scholars translated Greek philosophy into Arabic, producing the texts that would eventually spark the European Renaissance. Persian poets set the cultural standards of the Islamic world. The people who had supposedly been conquered were running the civilization of their conquerors. The absorption strategy had worked again, and then came the Mongols. If the Arab conquest was the greatest threat to Iranian cultural identity, the Mongol invasion was the greatest threat to Iranian physical existence. When Genghis Khan arrived in northeastern Iran in 1220, what followed was destruction on a scale the medieval world had never seen. Ancient cities that had existed for thousands of years were systematically massacred. The populations were not enslaved, they were killed. The irrigation systems that had made the Eastern Plateau fertile for millennia were deliberately destroyed. Entire regions that had supported millions of people were turned into silent wastelands. Contemporary chroniclers struggled to describe what they witnessed. One historian estimated that the Mongols killed more people in the territories of Iran than had been born there in the previous centuries. Modern historians debate the exact numbers, but agree the destruction was unprecedented. The Mongol invasion came closer to permanently erasing Iranian civilization than any previous catastrophe in its history, and something happened that no rational analysis could have predicted. When Hulagu, the grandson of Genghis Khan, established the Ilkhanate in Iran in 1256, the Mongols were nomadic warriors who had destroyed cities for sport and had absolutely no interest in becoming Persian. Within 2 generations, the Ilkhans had converted to Islam. Within 3 generations, they were speaking Persian at court, commissioning Persian miniature paintings, building Persian mosques with the blue tile domes that are now the visual signature of Iranian Islamic architecture, and patronizing Persian poets and philosophers. The people who had come to annihilate Iranian civilization had become its greatest sponsors. The same pattern repeated with Tamerlane, who swept through Iran at the end of the 14th century and built pyramids of human skulls outside the cities he conquered. Even Tamerlane could not resist. He carried Iranian craftsmen back to his capital at Samarkand, where they transformed his court into a center of Persian cultural production. His descendants, the Timurids, became some of the greatest patrons of Persian art and literature in history. The destroyers had become the preservers. This happened not once, not twice, but every single time. Because Iranian culture had something that military force could not provide. It had beauty. It had depth. It had a literary tradition, a philosophical tradition, an artistic tradition, and an architectural tradition that was so